Have you ever had a toy that you really wanted to play with, and for whatever reason you couldn't get it to play with it? This is that toy for me. This is the DJI Mavic Air drone, and I've been waiting for this sucker for a very long time. I'm not a very technical person, I'm not a very good drone pilot, but I just thought it was really cool, and I got one, and right when I got it, the sky opened up, and I've not been able to play with it. And so finally we got a break in the weather, and I got to go out to the park, and I took Wagon, and I decided to make this video because I think this can really help other people. So this is 5 tips on how to keep your dog from reacting to distractions when you're in a public place. And so, you know, things like drones, RC cars, you know, bikes, stuff like that, that really kind of throws people off whenever they're handling their dog. And you know, when you're in a public place, this can manifest itself in a bunch of weird ways, barking, pulling, that sort of stuff. And so I'm out here with Wagon, and I just want to give you guys some basic tips, not anything complicated. It's more of a mindset video for how to approach areas like this. So tip number 1, and that's have a plan. I want you to think about the entrance and the exit. I want you to think about how you're going to get into this environment and how you're going to get out of it. That's just something that will end up coming up, of course, when you go on the trip, but it's not something that we usually plan out, and a lot of times that's where we have the most issues, right when you come into an environment and then when you're trying to exit the environment. And that's because you're usually encumbered in some way. You might have stuff in your hands, you might be, you know, talking on the phone, and your dog picks up on a lot of this, and when you're getting in and out of the car, they tend to assert themselves. And so I've been to River Legacy a whole bunch, and I know this park like the back of my hand. And so I, you know, picked a part of the park that me and Wagon could hang out in, and it was very wet the entire day. And I took him out, and we started working, and I launched the drone into the air. And what I'm trying to do is basically get him not to pay attention to it. And so one of the things I think that you would really want to do is make sure that you have the right equipment whenever you're working with your dog. Right now you can see that I have a 6-foot leash, a long line, and I also have a bed. I got the drone, I got a lot of stuff going on here. And that's what you want to do whenever you're working with your dog outside. It's not necessarily practical in all situations, but whenever you're in the public, especially, we have leash laws here in Texas, so you definitely want to abide by those. And a good way to do that is just to, you know, bring the right equipment and to employ it in the right way. And so what you want to do is break up some of these sessions whenever you're working with him. That's why I have the bed. And one of the things that having the 30-foot long line and the bed do is it establishes a perimeter. You want to set up some boundaries. You want to tell your dog where you want him to be in relation to you. So when you're going out, having a 30-foot long line is basically just a rough reference to about how far I would like you to stray away from me. So Wagon is kind of in a free roam situation here. And we've done, you know, off-leash walking 1,000 times, so he's not really reacting to the walking. We're not really focusing on the walking. This is more about the drone, and I want to make sure that he's not having any reaction to that. And so I'm trying to mix up some bed work here with some downstays, with some leash work, so he just has a pretty good mix of stuff to do. And that's what you want to do with your dog. You want to have a good mix of things to do whenever you take them out. So tip number 2, get the lay of the land. Once again, I know River Legacy Park like the back of my hand. I've been there, you know, 1,000 times since I was a little kid. And that being said, you don't want to take anything for granted. So whenever you get to the park, you really want to look around and see if there are other people with the dog, or the dog's off leash. What kind of dogs are they? Are they in control? Are they not in control? These are factors that are really going to affect the handling. Try to zigzag whenever you get out of your car, and also, guys, take your time. Nothing says that you're on a stopwatch whenever you get out to the park. And here's the thing: is your dog will try to put pressure on you in that way. You'll come to a stop and he'll start dancing around in the car. He might start vocalizing, that sort of stuff, and you don't want to get out of the car and reward that sort of behavior. So when you pull up, just take your time, act like you're not under any sort of pressure, because if you are, your dog will pick up on that, and they'll be much more likely to assert themselves in that situation. So tip number 3 and that is break up high distraction areas into small parts. River Legacy is a very big park. It encompasses a pretty wide area. It's got lakes and other stuff and trails, and that's a lot for a dog to take in at once. Even a fairly advanced dog might have some issues with all the parts of River Legacy if I come out and I just try to go, all the way around the park. Now, after a while, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can go wherever you want within River Legacy and you'll get the right kind of performance. But initially, what you want to do is break an area like this down into small parts. You see the playground in the distance. You see the trail, the walking path right in the middle. You don't necessarily want to go to an area like this whenever you go out and you're working with your dog. You actually would like to find an area that's a little bit more out of the way, and then work your way up to the higher distraction environments. So that goes to not stacking the deck against your dog. If you know that your dog has an issue with squirrels, and you're working in a wooded area and you're working near squirrels, then you should just expect that you might have some issues with handling. And so what you want to do is start to work in those areas before the squirrels are there. So let's say there's a time of the day where you can take them out and work under those trees or in that general vicinity, and that distraction isn't there. Work on some of those basic behaviors there when the distraction isn't present, and then when you get out there and the squirrel is there or whatever distraction is there, you're much more likely to have success in that situation. So try not to just have this really high onset distraction that you've never exposed to your dog. Try not to have that and just throw that at them in an environment that's new to them. That's really stacking the deck on them, and that can make it hard. So in this situation, once again, Wagon has been here a bunch of times, and the drone, while it's a distraction he doesn't necessarily like, it's par for the course. He's used to having crazy things kind of thrown at him here. You don't necessarily know what to expect when you come here. A lot of people do have their dogs off leash whenever you're out here, and so you have to compensate for that. And even though it's a really, really good park, you really just want to keep your head on a swivel. And guys, that brings me to point number 4, which is you want to lead, not follow. And you want to definitely do this whenever you're out at the park. You want to have a plan and you want to try to stick to it. There are other handlers and they're doing their thing, and they, sometimes the plan might be just to have fun at the park and to go out and play fetch with your dog, and that's fine. But what you want to do is just, once again, have a little bit of a strategy to that. Have an area of the park that you like to work in, and if your dog starts to deteriorate in any way, do not hesitate to take your dog to another area of the park or engage in another behavior that's going to keep your dog on the straight and narrow. Sometimes you'll be outside, and even you'll be working with a dog that might have been exposed to a distraction a bunch of times. Maybe it's a squirrel, maybe it's a cat, maybe it's a loud noise, and they might have not reacted to that in a long time. Might be lightning, thunder, or something like that. And you might take them out there, and you might have a bad experience. Don't feel bad if you have to take a step back and to do some basic obedience in that environment. Every dog needs retraining, and even well-behaved dogs can take a step back. In this environment, it's pretty wet out here, and so Wagon is having some issues with the water. He doesn't really like to be super wet, and so me just kind of taking him and putting him on the bed and breaking that up can really help him acclimate to the environment, and I think it'll also really help you when you're handling in the real world. One of the things you want to do is, when in doubt, do not stop. Now, this is where I might differ from a lot of other handlers who might teach a downstay or a sit stay in the face of a distraction. I'm usually going to tell you to try to keep it moving in the initial phases of training, which means I want you to try to change direction or turn or do something like that. And the reason why is because, especially if there's a strength differential between you and your dog, or a speed differential, when you come to a stop, it can give him or give your dog the opportunity to assert themselves. So what you want to do is try to avoid that, and one of the best ways to do that is to just try to stay moving when you're out there. That's going to give you the best ability to determine your own fate, and later on you can practice stopping or being more stationary in the face of distractions. But initially, I want to tell you not to bog down in the face of those distractions if your dog is not fairly used to performing in the face of a challenge that high. So another thing that you want to do is anticipate when you're out here, guys. You really do not want to, you don't want to take anything for granted. So you would like to, if the world was a perfect place, everybody would be on your level, and you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about people coming up and having their dog off leash or just having mistakes. But the world is a real place, and that's going to happen. And so you want to keep your head on a swivel and don't pay necessarily every distraction attention. So what I mean by that is if there's a person that is, let's say they're really physical with your dog and they don't necessarily ask permission to interact with your dog, just reach out and pet them. Don't feel obliged to have to stop for that person. You can tell them, don't be mean about it, but you can tell them not necessarily to pet your dog and that sort of thing. And sometimes when you're training, guys, that happens. When I'm outside and I'm working with my dog, people will walk right up to me and will just walk right up to my dog and just pet him or do something like that. And I want to empower you to assert yourself in that situation, and you don't necessarily have to be a jerk about it. And understand, if you're in the middle of the park, that might happen. So don't be a jerk about it. But what you want to do is try to give that person guidance and how to handle your dog in terms of give them a treat and tell them to give him a treat for sitting, something like that. And asserting yourself and leading in that situation is going to do you a much better service than sitting back and allowing the environment to dictate to you, what's going on. Also, guys, stay focused on your dog. One of the things that I see when we go to the park is that we tend to disconnect, and we will get a cell phone, or we will, start doing something that isn't necessarily us interacting with our dog. And while I don't expect you to pay 100% attention to your dog the entire time when you're in an environment like this, initially when you're in the training phases with your dog, especially when you're coming to a brand new environment, you don't want to just be plugging away on your phone. You want to go ahead and interact with your dog, give them positive reinforcement for doing the right thing. That's going to prevent you from having to yell "no bad dog," and in the long run, I think you're going to be much better off for it. So guys, once again, this video wasn't a whole bunch of high-level technical tips on how to train your dog, just an overall mindset. And what you want to do is just start with that and start with the basics, and then work your way up to the more technical parts of handling, guys. You guys have a nice day. This is Mario Mouton with We Train Dogs.